Hey guys, what's up? So Blade Runner and Blade Runner 2049, how do you make a sequel to an already great movie, right? And so I think they did it. I mean, they made a sequel to Blade Runner, and I think Blade Runner needed a sequel because every great movie needs a sequel, but I do think definitely, of course, it wasn't as good as the first one, and it's really, really hard to make a second movie as good as the first one, especially that the first movie kind of had a beginning, a middle, and an end. You know, it had its own story, it was a standalone movie. It wasn't the kind of thing you can make a series out of, but they kind of did it. They kind of like took it and said, let's make a continuation of that years into the future. Let's make a continuation of Blade Runner, right? And so they kind of had the same thing going on. You know, they were the Blade Runners, the people that were after the replicants, and they were hunting down the replicants, and there were replicants and all kinds of things. And it was an interesting concept in Blade Runner 2049 where the way I got the movie was that like there were replicants that had children who were replicants. And they were like, well, if a replicant can be born, then they're actually alive and they're really people. But if a replicant is made, then they're a replicant and it's okay to retire them. Right? And so it was a weird story where like, well, I don't know, like if replicants were made to have children, then they would be made to have children and the children would be made by the replicants. But I guess it's something in human nature that thinks if something is born, then it's more real, it's more human, it's more a person, it's more alive than it's something was made like a machine. You know, and that was a weird kind of like story twist, and I think that was the only thing that they really changed about the movie. They only changed that about the story, and there was not a lot going on. But I really also, it felt like they were kind of trying to keep the mood the same, and I do think that was a good idea. Because the whole mood in the first Blade Runner had a lot to do with why people liked that movie. It was a very cyberpunk, it was very moody. It was very like, it had moods and it had like scenes that had moods, and you know, just the weather and you know the flying cars and the way the people were talking to each other and the whole story and the plot lines and the acting and the directing. It was very, very moody. You know, it's kind of like it's one of those movies, one of these stories that puts you into a certain mood. I didn't find it does it that much, but I think that they were trying to do the same thing with the second Blade Runner movie. But at the same time, they were thinking, well, how the hell do we make a second Blade Runner movie? And it felt like they really didn't have a really good, clear idea of how to make the next chapter of the story. Now, what really surprised me in the second, in 2049, is that Deckard came back. Is that they had Harrison Ford come back and play Deckard in the movie. And what was weird was like, and that was cool because I think Harrison Ford, it's like when Harrison Ford goes into a movie, right away the movie becomes amazing. You know, it's like that Star Wars movie that came out, and Harrison Ford was in it a little bit. And you're thinking like, why didn't if they're going to put Harrison Ford into a movie, why not just put him in the movie? Make him Deckard and make him to play a part of the movie. Make him give him a role. Why put a big actor like Harrison Ford and not, you're going to put him in the movie anyway, why not make the movie with him in it? You know, it was going to be a good movie just because of the acting of Harrison Ford. Every movie that's made with Harrison Ford in it becomes a great movie. Even Air Force One was great, and I'm going to say one of the reasons Air Force One was great was because of Harrison Ford. And so in Blade Runner 2049, I was surprised that Harrison Ford was in it. But why was he in it for like 3 scenes? You know, he was only in it for a few scenes where they could have really put him into it. They really could have given him more of a role. And I think the same thing happened with the Star Wars film that came out. It was the Star Wars, it was the sequel, it was the one that came out after there hasn't been a Star Wars in years, and they couldn't get the original cast together, right? So they got Harrison Ford to do a little bit of a sort of like an appearance, but you know, the part of the movie where Harrison Ford was the good part of the movie. And I think the same thing with Blade Runner 2049. I enjoyed the part of the movie the most with Harrison Ford in it, you know? I do just one of the things I liked about Blade Runner 2049. But I really wish that they would have really put him into it a little bit more, because they kind of put him in there and they didn't really put him in there for too much of a reason. And they also they put the replicant that Harrison Ford in Blade Runner fell in love with and ended up going to Mars or something like that. That they at the end of the first movie, he basically hooked up with the replicant and they had a thing going on, and they had her appear in Blade Runner 2049, and it did look a lot like her. It didn't look exactly like her, but it did look a lot like her. But the thing is, the way I see it is that you want to make a movie, you want to make a sequel to a good movie, and I think every good movie people want to see a sequel, right? Even Conan the Barbarian came Conan the Destroyer, and I really think that that's the same thing that happened in Blade Runner 2049. Now, I really do think that Blade Runner 2049, I don't know, it was better than, it wasn't like a flop. It wasn't something where they tried to do it and they couldn't do it. They couldn't get the story right. They couldn't they didn't really do a good job of it. They didn't take it seriously or anything like that. No, I think they did. I think they got the story right. I think they took it seriously. I think they really legitimately tried to make the next movie in the series, or the next movie in the story. But of course, it's like anyone's guess as to how do you continue a story that's already been done, beginning, middle, and end. How do you continue it? What do you do? Like is it just more replicants being retired, or how do you create another story in the Blade Runner universe, and make it interesting and make it stand up to the first one and stuff like that? So they had the new guy, and I think for a while he couldn't figure out if he was human, if he was a replicant, if he was born, if he was made. It's weird because actually the way I understood it was because they really didn't figure it out really, that whether his memories were really his or the memories were implanted. They didn't really know, but basically he was a replicant, I think, because it was really hard to follow the movie. He was a replicant that hunted other replicants, which is kind of weird because it's hard to side on the side of one or the other. Because in the first one was a human hunting replicants. And the reason the human was hunting the replicants was because the replicants weren't human and they were a danger to humans, right? But in this one, humans are making replicants to hunt other replicants. The weird part of the story is he was a replicant. He was synthetic. He wasn't a real person. And I feel like that whole idea, it really it's very, very hard to relate with the main character when the main characters are a replicant or a robot or some kind of a machine. It's hard to relate with a main character like that. I've never seen a main character who's a machine in any other movie. And it was just very, very hard to relate to the main character. And it was also very, very hard to have sympathy for the replicants that he was retiring. Because in the first movie, he fell in love with a replicant. He fell in love, Harrison Ford's character, Deckard, fell in love with one of the machines that he was supposed to kill. Because she was so realistic that he felt that she was real. And the story was at what point is something real and at what point is something a machine? And the main character in the first Blade Runner, the main evil not the evil, but the main, the villain character, the replicant who Deckard was after, who, at the end of the movie, it was it made you question where just because this person was synthetic and made and the machine doesn't mean that he wasn't real with real feelings and real emotions and just he wasn't a real person. He at the end of the movie, he was I have seen things that other people can only imagine. And saying something like that can only come from whether it's a machine or real, someone who's like, it feels like he's alive. It feels like he has consciousness. He seems to be alive. He seems to have consciousness, you know? And that was the whole thing. Are they right to retire these people, to give people, to create something that feels like they're real, feels like they're alive, but give them a short lifespan? You know, but tell them like you can only live for this amount of years and then you're done. Your circuitry is gonna end, right? And there was that kind of like idea, and I think this was one of these ideas that people think like, is it real? Are they real? Is it like, you know, is a machine? Does it have feelings? You know what I mean? It's just like, if you make something that talks and walks and looks like a person and thinks they're a person and feels like a person and appears to be a person, what makes them still, how can you see them as anything but a person? Even if they're like basically synthetic, if they're not made of, you know, flesh, you know, if they're made of like artificial materials, you know, if they really seem real enough, you're gonna feel like they're real. Just like Hal, the computer Hal in 2001: A Space Odyssey, he felt real, you know, like, so it was like, and it makes you think about it because like intelligent computers, it just feels, you kind of like, you know, if it talks and interacts with you, you feel like they're a person, you feel like they're real, you know? And so in the second movie, it was hard to relate with why are they still like, you know, retiring these other these other replicants and stuff like that. It was hard to really figure out what the main story was about. Like, what was the idea of 2049? What's the point of the movie? What does it make you think about, right? And it was more like a story of, it was sort of like, it felt like the continuing adventures of Deckard, the you know, the guy, the Blade Runner. It was sort of like the continuing adventures of him, without him being as the main character. And it was just very, very difficult to kind of like relate with the main character who is kind of like not human, doesn't act human, doesn't think they're human. And also like, it's weird because the main character had a wife was also like a hologram, a computer. And what was interesting like in the story was that like he was very attached to his wife. And so it was sort of like a computer replicant, but married to another computer. And it feels like, so at what point is there anything real in this story? Like the thing is, it wasn't like a computer that thought he was real. It was a replicant that thought he was a replicant, knew he wasn't real, accepted that, and just did whatever he was programmed to do, right? And then all of a sudden, in the middle of the movie, questioned whether he was real or was born or what the hell went on. Like, why were his memories real memories? That was cool, you know. But the part where he was basically a replicant, it was just really, really hard to relate with that. It's sort of like relating with. It's like sort of like making R2-D2 and C-3PO the main characters of Star Wars. You know what I mean? It's just, it feels, maybe it can be done, but it was very, very hard to kind of relate with the character. It was like at the point where the character, when the character started to think, oh my God, are my like memories real? Was I born? Was I made? What was my history? What happened? You know, that was a little bit interesting. That was like, that adventure was going on. But that was not necessarily a Blade Runner story, you know, or kind of a Blade Runner story. It was because like they're, you know, like in Blade Runner, they had these implanted memories and stuff like that. So he was a replicant, but it was a replicant that didn't know whether he was real or not at some point, which was like interesting. But the fact that he wasn't real and that it ended up that he actually wasn't real and he wasn't born and he wasn't human and he was just a replicant was like, what is the whole point of the story when that story kind of went nowhere? It would have been one thing for someone to think that they were a replicant and then it ended up that they were a real person, but it was a replicant who thought he might have been maybe real or more real or born or something, and then as it turned out he wasn't. So it was just like, what was the story about, really, besides more retiring replicants? Besides someone's job to retire replicants and the continuation of that kind of story. It was like another chapter. But I don't think that it was a legitimate chapter. I think that they could have went a lot more into... I think they could have went a lot more... They could have done a better movie than what they did. You know, they could have done it. And I think the way they could have done it was to get a better idea of what the plot was, how to continue a story like that. You know, like, they could have kind of like figured out, okay, what would make sense in this universe? Because it was shot well. Obviously, people, they took it seriously. They put Harrison Ford, which also, one more thing about that, if they should have just put Harrison Ford in the whole movie. You know, it would have been a much better movie if it was like Continuing Adventures of Deckard. Because if you're going to make a Blade Runner 2, and you're going to put Harrison Ford in it, but not as the main character, like, what is he, how is it Blade Runner 2? It's just like such a, I feel like that's a huge mistake. You know, because if you're going to put Blade Runner 2, and you're going to put Harrison Ford in it, why would you only put him in for like a few scenes, and that's it, and not make him the main character? You know, yes, he's older, but so what? It's Blade Runner 2049. He's supposed to be older. It's further on in the future. You know, it's sort of like it's further on in the future, so he's supposed to be older, right? And so give him that. Like, what happened to him? Like when he went to this other planet and married this replicant, and what and you know, what happened after that? You know, it would have been cool that, like, the story where he goes to this other planet, he gets away from everything, marries this replicant, and he has this lifestyle, and then they're after him. Now they're coming after him, like more replicants are coming after him and stuff like that. Or the agency that hunts down replicants are coming after his wife, and he's got to defend her against the agency and the humans who are coming after him. You know, something like that. That would have been a continuation of the first movie. Because the first movie really did need a continuation, and it kind of said, well, the logical continuation was like, begin it where it left off. And even if like it's Blade Runner 2049 and it's 20 years later, and Harrison Ford is 20 years older, he's still married to the same replicant, or he's still has a relationship with the same replicant. So they could have made something about his relationship there and just put that as a little bit of content in the sequel. And maybe they found out that he did that, and they came after him because of it, and he has to like survive and maybe like protect her and then deal with them that are after him and stuff like that. Or maybe there was more replicants who were friends of the replicants that he retired years ago. Or maybe what they did was they took the replicants and the ones that he killed, and then they made them alive again with another short lifespan, but with memories, and they remembered what had happened to them in the past. That would be cool. Like, they actually remembered Deckard hunting them down, and now, like, with those memories or whatever it is, so someone implanted them for whatever reason, they're after him somewhere like that. It would have been cool as a continuation of like People Against Replicants, and the whole thing of what's really alive, what's really human, what's really a machine, you know, all that kind of thing, that whole plot, that whole idea behind the story. Whereas, like, you know, a machine that doesn't know if they're real, and it was just like it was kind of bummed out. They killed the machine's wife, who's also a machine. They killed her. And even though the scenes were cool, and it was just a long movie, it was just like, I don't know, it really wasn't necessarily a sequel to the first movie. And it also wasn't like a standalone movie I think they took parts, I think they took, like, you know, they basically just did another movie inside that Blade Runner universe. And, you know, inside the Blade Runner universe, and they just changed, they did a lot different. Like, it was the same thing with, like, you know, Blade Runners and replicants and all that. That was the same, but the substance just wasn't a lot of it. And they could have put Harrison Ford as the main, as the star of that movie. That would have been a lot better, because why put him a star like that as in a small role like that, you know, and they could have really continued it, and they could have made it a little bit more relevant and a little bit more some way that people can relate with it, because people can relate with people against replicants. Are replicants real? Because they look real, you know, they feel real. They seem alive, right? So should they be hunted down? Should they be retired? Should they have a short lifespan, right? And you feel for the replicants because they feel like real people, because they actually are real actors and or real people. But you know, and so there's a lot of feelings involved in what's going on. And I think that the first movie evoked a lot of feelings from people. They kind of tried to get that from people. They try to get like people to, you know, they try to get a rise out of people in the first one with the questions they ask and the whole situations that they put people in and whatever it was. But in the second one, it was just weird. It was just like, what is really, because the plot kind of changed and changed and changed, and it didn't stick with anything, and it didn't really have a deep meaning like the first movie did. The second one didn't really have a lot of a meaning. It was just like, except that if someone is born, does that make him, even if they're replicants, does that make him more human than someone who's made, I guess, but not really too much past that. So I don't know, guys. Let me know what you're thinking in the comments. Thanks for watching. I hope you enjoyed the video. Like and subscribe and share the video with your friends, and check out my other videos. And yeah, turn on notifications so you know when I'm making a video, and I will see you guys in another video later.